era defined by visual storytelling and digital presence, the art of content creation holds unprecedented significance. So, whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out in the industry, sorry, the notes are on the screen. Whether you're a studio professional or just starting out in the industry, you'll realize that it's a domain that is constantly evolving, demanding adaptability, creativity, and innovation. So as we embark on this journey talking about content creation, I encourage you to remember, it's not just about finding the perfect shooting method. It's about the experiences and the stories and the art that you and your teams are going to be creating along the way. So, for those of you that don't know me, I am Emily Morris, and I'm currently studio manager for the second largest retailer in the UK, which is Sainsbury's. In addition to this, as Thomas just rightly introduced, I'm also looking after Ecom Studio Training Academy, where I'm looking to evolve and train the next generation getting into our industry. Previous to this role, I have held studio leadership positions in brands such as ASOS, Boohoo, and TK Maxx. Now, just a couple of points on this. One, some of the brands I've just mentioned are actually in the room today. So any examples I'm going to be using throughout the talk, I'm not going to be name dropping. They will know, I will know, and we'll leave it there. Second point, if you see me on any of the breaks or at the after parties, pulling people away from each other, that'll be me trying to ensure my previous managers don't all meet up and talk about my development areas. And let me just save you the trouble, I can still talk for England, hence why my voice is gone. But each one of these prestigious brands has served me as an invaluable training ground, equipping me with a rich tapestry of skills that I've been fortunate enough to weave together to truly understand why different brands create content the way they do. And these are the very insights that I'm going to be sharing with you today. So one of the immediate realizations I had when working in these remarkable studios was their stark contrast in their operational philosophies. Each was driven by a unique set of objectives and goals. Each used content creation in different ways, and each had a different view of what good looked like to them. So very early on in my journey, I couldn't help but think, we all have the same purpose in an e-commerce photo studio, to create content for our online stores. So why do we create content in different ways? And I know you're probably thinking, and yes, we do shoot different product types, and yes, we may not all have the same budget, but I can almost guarantee that if I gave you all £500,000 to shoot some clothing in your studio, you will choose to execute that in a different way. And rightly so. Every studio is unique. So let's dive a little bit more into that. The methods you're seeing on the screen, if I get out of the way, are 6 shooting methods commonly seen in an e-commerce photo studio. Now, for those of you that have been in the industry a while, you will know that the methods we have at our disposal has increased over the years. The way that we create our content and how we use that content has evolved. So how do you know which method is right for you? It's so easy to get swept up in the latest trends and fads, but is that really right for you in your studio? So it would be great to get a little view of what everyone's doing in the audience. Please, can you raise your hand if you shoot 2 or more of these methods in your studio? Okay. Please, can you keep your hands raised if you shoot 3 or more? Okay. 4 or more? All 6 methods in your studio. Okay, great. So this is a clear demonstration that even though we all have the same purpose in an e-commerce photo studio, we're not using everything at our disposal. So why is that? After navigating my journey throughout these studios, I can't help but think the reason why is down to priorities. So this scale you are seeing on the screen is a key topic of discussion that frequently comes up within our industry. How do we balance operational excellence with creative excellence? But what I've come to learn is not every studio wants to get that balance in the middle. Some studios will tip this scale to a certain point, which will directly impact how and why they create content the way they do. It will ultimately define them studio priorities. So understanding where your studio sits on this scale is absolutely key, or so I've come to find, before looking into different shooting methods. And let me give you some examples. So if a studio is tipping towards operational excellence, their time to site somewhere between 24 and 48 hours, their reshoot percentage below 1%, and that studio's priority is to get a lot of product online as quickly as possible. Proposing something along the lines of model or even video is not going to be the right fit, or potentially not. Flip side of that, a studio is tipping towards creative excellence. Proposing something along the line of mannequin or automation machines, again, may not be the right fit. And yes, I have done both of these things, so this is coming from learnings. So now it's time to ask yourself and the honest question of where your studio thinks that you sit on this scale, because this really supported me when trying to find that right content method. So even though I've gone through these experiences of these failings as such, it was within these learnings that propelled me to truly define why different brands create content the way they do. It was within these learnings I learned to fail quickly, to fail often, and to understand the importance of failing. But most importantly, it was within these learnings that I was able to identify a very simple strategy that I've come to find to help us identify the right shooting method that is authentic and aligned to a studio. So, this strategy. The first thing I do is I identify what are the studio's priorities, who does this impact, and what options do we have at the disposal. Second step, implement. How do you implement this? Key considerations and steps to take forward. And last, improve. How do you continuously improve this method? How do you stay up to date with the industry evolutions? So this strategy you're seeing on the screen, I tend to use this quite often because this covers both the operational requirements as well as the creative. So when I use this, both areas are assessed and executed as equal. So let's dive into identify. The first thing I do when identifying in a brand, I look for the brand's mission. Now, this is easier said than done. And I've heard a brand mission be called so many things. It could be your North Star, content pillars, creative pillars. Ultimately, you need to understand what that brand's mission is. What's their aim? What do they expect to see from the studio? And then on the back of this, identifying key stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, I'm talking about customers as well. Who are these people, and what do they actually want? And is it the same things as you? And I say that again, easier said than done. The amount of times that studios' aspirations may align with stakeholders. But what this does, it essentially causes a bottleneck when coming in to try new shooting methods. So I'd really advise identifying these areas to truly understand them. But once you've got these two things in place, it will help you define them priorities. So you'll start to understand truly where you sit on that excellence scale we just spoke about. It will ultimately help you list out and your key priorities. And then on the back of this, this will narrow down your options. So you know your brand's missions, you know your stakeholders' aspirations, you know your priorities. All of the options that we've now got at our disposal will become clearer of what's right and authentic to your studio. And then the last thing I like to do in the identify phase is review. And this is probably the most important bit. You need to review, well, what I like to do is review what I've already got. So the options I'm thinking about. Can my team do this? Do they have the right skill sets? Do we have the right equipment, budget, space? And if we don't, what do I need? And then essentially, once you've got all of these things in place, you've got that skeleton for that business case that you then need to build, push forward, and drive. And this leads you into the implement. So on this one, implementing a new shooting method can be so fun, so try to remember to enjoy it. We can often get so wrapped up in business cases and BAU, we forget to get excited about pushing our new product photography to new heights and in new ways, and getting the team excited about this. And this leads me to the first point, communication. I find communication with the teams to be absolutely vital. For them, understanding why they are doing something is super important, as we all know. But on top of that, for them to be engaged, excited, and motivated behind it, it's going to strengthen your delivery. The second phase in implementing is testing. And I personally think this is the fun part. You would have already scoped out any of the equipment costs or any time you need in this phase, in the identify phase. So this is a part of really giving the brief to your team and letting them run with it. And then on top of this, you're not just testing the creative output. I tend to test things like the targets, that time to site, the QC processes, and the overall output. We can often get swept up in testing of how something looks. Technical integrations and processes can be overlooked, which will ultimately impact their end goal. Third part is expectation. So any images or lessons learned from the testing phase, you'll now be in a position of where you can set them expectations. So when I'm saying expectations, I'm talking about things like KPIs, your shoot guides and style guides, building these out and being really clear to your stakeholders and your team what is expected about on this new method. And then this leads me into data. Before implementing a new shooting method, I'd really like to have a look at data, and Fatima and Kevin had a really good touch point on this earlier. But there's a couple of ways that I like to get data. One, if you've got an e-commerce team or your insights team that can get you that information, fantastic. But I do understand not all studios can get this. Other data you might be able to use is literally things like your best sellers and your worst sellers. I was at a brand once, and we were looking at our worst sellers, and all of the images were literally models just sitting on the floor, regardless of what product type it was. So, spoiler alert, we asked them to stand up and we stopped using it as the main image, but essentially, the key trends and patterns you can find about your content creation method, you would be surprised. So this is something that I really like to lean into when putting a new content creation method in studio. So after all of these things are in play, essentially you're ready, and what I like to do is then execute this shooting method. And then the last bit, and probably my favorite, is improve. So if you've got data, absolutely great. This is the time to put it forward and lean into that. On the back of that, getting feedback from your teams and your stakeholders to really see how they're finding the content, how are the sales. And then on top of that, I like to do the legendary SWOT analysis on looking at how the shooting method is performing. So SWOT analysis, strengths. What's gone well? What areas have given good feedback? Weaknesses. What areas have been slower? Are the processes working okay? What's that feedback from the team and stakeholders saying to you? Opportunities. Is there opportunities to put more product type through the shooting method? Is there opportunities in the industry trends? Is there any crossovers? And then the last thing is threats. Is there anything coming up that might impact the shooting method? Can you afford it longer term? And is it sustainable for longer term growth? These are the questions I ask myself, write it all down, and essentially you'll have key improvement areas to take away for this shooting method. And I do like to do this every couple of months, especially when it's new. So this is the 3-step strategy I use to support in navigating and finding the right content creation method that is authentic and aligns to a studio. But before I finish, I do want to ask the question, when was the last time you reviewed your current shooting methods in your studio? Are you shooting that way because it's the perfect fit? Or are you shooting that way because it's legacy? I would advise you all to take a little step back and ask yourself the question, if you're lucky enough to have what Morgan had previously and to open them studio doors tomorrow, would they be the shooting methods you would choose? Or are you doing it because you've always done it like that? Have a little try of this strategy I was showing today and see for yourselves. You might be surprised on the outcome. But my point here is not to be afraid to challenge your current shooting methods in studio. What was great 2 or 5 years ago may not be the case now. Technology has advanced. The content creation methods at our disposal has increased. Our customer wants and needs may have changed, but most importantly, our brand's mission may have pivoted, so we may need to pivot too. Ultimately, the method you choose needs to resonate with you and your unique studio. There really isn't one size that fits all. But please remember to enjoy that journey with your team. It's not just about finding the quickest and cheapest time to site or even about the most aspirational images. It really is about enjoying the experiences, the stories, and the art that you and your teams are going to be creating. Thank you. Water. Thank you.
Get some water there, yeah?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Emily, and thanks for sharing. Let's dig into the Q&A session here. You talked about taking a step back and look at what you're actually doing. Mm-hmm. How often would you recommend that you actually do that you audit your methods and look at what you're doing, how you're shooting, etc.? Would you actually recommend that you put that into cadence, where you do that like on a yearly basis, or what do I know? What's your take on that?
So what we're currently doing at our studios, we actually look at this monthly, but I could think it completely depends on the studio and how authentic and aligned they feel to that. So if the sales are going really well, they haven't got a lot of noise from their stakeholders, then I would say probably about 3 to 6 months. But if it's something where you are getting a lot of noise, it is probably a case of assessing what you've got a lot sooner than that. So okay. I think it varies depending on studio.
Good, cool, thanks. We have a very specific question here. What's the most on-trend shooting style you've used this year?
The most on-trend? You know
on-trend.
what, it's very similar to what Morgan just shown, actually. So you know how people are now starting to take their detail shots on model, as opposed to the cutout stations. That's something we've pivoted to not long ago, actually. And I would say there was obviously quite a clear cost improvement within that, but also it looks great as well. So I'd probably say that. We haven't actually executed major things over the last few months, but I probably would say that. Okay. It's very similar to what Morgan showed earlier.
Okay, good. All right. We have one here, the top one. What is one of the... No, this one here I was actually looking at. What was the hardest shoot type to sell to your stakeholders? What was the hardest shoot type to implement? Have you had ideas where people have said, no, Emily, don't go there.
Yeah.
That's not for us.
Yeah, and I think I know one that's popping in my head. I was at X Brand, and it was probably a case of, it was just before COVID, and I do think it was a case of trying to pitch automation machines into a brand that essentially wanted to be on that creative, dynamic side of things. I think that was probably the hardest pitch, for sure.
To sell in?
Yeah.
Good,
yeah.
Cool. What is one of the biggest changes your method has led you to implement?
The biggest changes?
Yeah. Have you yourself taken that step back, ran through your method and come up with something that dramatically changed it, the way you did things or approached things or whatever?
Yeah, I think the first time I identified this method was definitely at that same brand, to be fair, but it wasn't necessarily a new shooting type, but it was how we were using the method. So I decided to look at something that not a lot of people do. It was about our props area. I'm sure a lot of you that have been in the industry a while, we were shooting on literally white boxes and white plinths, battered plinths. And we were seeing the industry were thinking about moving this on. And then I decided to, identify what is everyone doing, what could we do, what aligns with us, and then implement that. And it was a really big improvement for the brand at the time, and I think they're still using it as well. So that was quite a big one, and that's where it started.
Cool, great. I'll jump to the top one here. How much time do you dedicate to the testing phase of the process to truly ideate and explore multiple avenues? I guess that depends on what we're testing here, right? But anyway, do you have some like?
No, I think it definitely depends on, like you said, what you're testing, who you're testing it with, and what the brand essentially wants. Because I think from a KPI and shoot guide perspective, I think that does take a good 2 to 3 months. I don't think things like that can be rushed, because you've got to do that communication after as well, and making sure everyone's happy with it. But from a creative point of view as well, I think it probably, I would say minimum 2 to 3 months.
Yeah, I guess that also depends on the magnitude of that change that you're implementing, right?
Yes.
Good. Where are you personally? Right? What's in your heart here? On the operational excellence versus the creativity scale.
This is a great question, because especially some of you that know me, I started off as a creative stylist, so editorials, magazines, and when I came into TK Maxx, I fell in love with e-com, like processes, production, leadership. I think I'm slightly over creative side, in the sense of if I'm on the scale, I'm literally a nudge to creative, but I do love a process. I love it when A to B satisfied. So I would say nudge to creative, but yeah.
Okay, interesting, good. Can you give examples of the most and the least successful changes you've made? I actually think the least successful could be the most interesting.
The most least successful.
Have you ever done something where you failed miserably?
Oh yeah, so for literally, I think a prime example, again, it was probably a case of, again, I was at a brand, I don't even know if they're here, but TK Maxx, obviously they shoot a lot on scale, and to be honest, for the 4.5 years I was there, I don't think I stopped pitching models to them. And it just wasn't right. And I think that's where I just sort of noticed, I was like, actually, not everyone wants that perfect balance of both. And that's when stuff started clicking. But I suppose that was an epic fail, because they're not shooting model, to be honest.
Yeah. Cool. We have one here. Have you ever had to pivot mid-implementation process because of certain circumstances? And what was your process to minimize time and resource losses? I mean, have you ever been doing something where this works, no, oops, it doesn't? Backed off and took a completely different direction?
Yeah, many times. And to be honest, I do quite like failing now, because I learn a lot from it. I think a prime example of that is probably the example I used about the automation machines. Obviously, I was pitching it. I was like, this is great. You get this and you get this. But actually, as we were growing, it didn't fit with the growth plans of what they envisioned. So we definitely had to backtrack on that. And then I suppose on the second part of that point, to minimize the process, I forgot the other bit. But I suppose it's just a case of really understanding that longer term growth ahead of pitching for it, to see if it matches.
Good, great. Thank you,
okay.
Emily,
No worries.
for getting up here and for sharing your insights.
Thank you.